Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Taylor. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Institute of Public Administration of Canada. So welcome again, and we're pleased to have this session. It's entitled, What's Keeping Deputy Ministers Up at Night? And a bit of a history there. I'm actually just going to do a very quick intro and sort of set the stage for our conversation. And we have a little over an hour, so I think I have about 50 minutes, and then we'll, okay. Now I'm going to keep it really brief. So that name is quite intriguing, and hopefully it looks like it's attracted quite a crowd here. What's keeping deputy ministers up at night? And it actually emanates from a survey that IPAC's been doing for close to 20 years now. In fact, we do it every 2 years. To sort of check in on the pulse of senior executive leaders in governments across Canada. And that's all orders of government. So we've focused on deputy ministers for this session, but just to appreciate that when we do go out and canvass, it's also includes all orders of government, including municipal and other agencies, etc. And I would tell you that that survey, and I'm going to go over through the results very quickly, but on your tables, you do have a quick summary. You don't have to follow along, but you can keep that. And I'm going to go through the results and just really highlight some topics and issues that probably, excuse me, will be raised during the course of our armchair panelist discussion. And Charles is actually going to go through and introduce all the panelists, so just let me go through this one. And so the survey results are really about perceptions, right? And it's about perspectives. And, so scientifically you may say, okay, well, it's not statistically sound or relevant. But in reality, what I would say to you is the reason we do this is just really to get the pulse, get an idea of what our senior executives are involved with, thinking about, concerned about. I guess the other moniker here is that the connotation there is what's keeping deputy ministers up at night sounds negative. You will hear it isn't. And it's not meant to be negative. It's actually the issues and challenges, but also the opportunities that our leaders are involved with. And again, so why do you do that? Well, I think it's probably the same reason that you're here today. So I think you saw that and you said, I want to get some insight. And it's about a lens on the work that we do, the reflection, and getting it from a different perspective. And that's what we do. We try and get it from that kind of perspective that gives us insight, and then we can actually contrast that with the views of others. So by example, if you're attending sessions later today, we recently just completed a new professional survey as well. So we can actually contrast those viewpoints and see where there's connection, synergy, and maybe even disconnects. So that's why we do that, and as I say, it's sort of a lens in from a different vantage point, and not that I'm conversant in this, but it's almost like Twitter. When you're following someone else, it's their lens, right? So you actually are attracted to those that you want to follow on Twitter because of the networks and outreach that they're doing, and it gives you a different vantage point. So that's what we're trying to achieve here today. Now, they told me I have a flicker, and I asked for the flicker to do the slides. And he had a really complicated one. He said, is this the deputy minister session? He said, okay, here's one with just 2 buttons. Thanks, buddy, but I don't know what that means. He said, just push the green. And it works, perfect. So again, I'm not going to go through the details, but just to give you a sense, and by the way, you have that summary on the table, but we'll make available these slides and any other information as part of the information coming out of the conference, so you'll have access to that as well. And what I'm going to do is just go over some of the highlights. So the other thing is we've partnered with Deloitte for the first time. As I say, we've been doing this for 20 years, but we partnered with Deloitte because we wanted to make this even more robust. And you'll also appreciate that we actually went out to a number of other countries as part of this process. And so not only do we have results from Canada, right across Canada at all levels, but we've also included Australia, New Zealand, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, the results I'm going to show you has actually been balanced to make sure that they truly reflect what's happening in Canada. But in the larger analysis we've done, we've been able to do a comparative analysis with other jurisdictions, a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences. And again, we focused on a number of key areas. So I'm just going to give you sort of the top highlights that come out of that. The first one is a growing concern with preparing for the next generation of leaders in public service. And so that's a reflection that lots of things are happening right now, and we're sort of focused on responding to today's needs, and there's a growing concern that, man, are we actually prepared for tomorrow? Now, we said leaders, but just to appreciate, I think the definition that all of our respondents would tell you is leadership isn't just at the top. It's actually throughout the organization. So it's about preparing for that future and a real growing concern about that next generation of public servants. Again, in that same kind of environment and light is that focus on the short term. And what is it doing? Is it compromising other things that we're trying to do, which includes what the bureaucracy normally does is plan for the longer term. It also means embracing innovation and developing new approaches, new innovation, new technologies. And again, and actually our speaker, Peter Nicholson, this morning really alluded to that environment, that we're in a new epoch, right? Where not only are the expectations grown, the transparency has grown, but the interchange with technology, communications, et cetera, has grown very rapidly. So everything is putting pressure on to respond to today's issues today. And I think when you go out and, I suspect this is true in your own jobs, leaves very little time to think about the future, plan for the future, and actually even prepare for that future. And so there's a number of things that we're trying to do to realize that. Then also, in terms of priorities, and again, all these things tend to connect, but in that kind of environment that I just talked about, and we don't have time to go into a whole bunch of depth, but it means a number of other things are changing within the world that we work and live. And it's, by example, moving to third-party service delivery and a growing concern about what that means. And I don't think it's actually a reluctance on the part of public service to adopt and adapt to that kind of environment. But again, I think there's sensitivity that we're moving so quickly. Is third-party service delivery actually meeting the expectations of the public? Again, which is a reflection of the commitment that senior executives and the rest of us share. Also, in that kind of environment, there's a growing divide between governments and the work of academia. And again, it was interesting because we weren't sure about this particular one, and working with our academic colleagues, we put these number of questions in to try and feel out whether or not there is something happening there. And again, the sense we have is that actually over the last decade or so, there's been sort of a growing divide between the academic institutions where they're going and governments engaging and involving, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but I think, again, with a rushed world, waiting for the evidence on certain areas to come forward is a huge challenge for governments that need to respond today. We talked about tweeting almost instantaneous government, right? And in the next area is, again, in that same vein, a growing concern about how we move into the digital world, right? So everyone knows we have to move there, and actually governments across this country are actually excelling and leading in that. But it doesn't mean there isn't a concern that we're meeting the expectation and needs, and even the design of government doesn't necessarily push us forward to readily adapt and adopt some of these new technologies, whether it's the technology itself, social media, analytics. And again, if you put this into the equation, what we're hearing from our senior executives, they know and understand that that's the way of the future. So the nervousness and concern is, can we keep pace? Can we actually adapt? Can we build the capacity in a timely fashion to meet the expectations of our political masters and the general public out there? Which leads us to the next one, and it's about the confidence that we gain through the public. And again, in that environment of greater scrutiny, there's growing concerns about building and supporting the public trust. And when you have things happening, whether it's scandals or other events happening, it's an interesting concern. And as I say, we've been doing this for a long time, and I know that the concern about public trust has always been there, right? Anyone that works in public service probably recognizes that. But I would tell you, having done this for a number of years now, I think that concern amongst our executives has been growing. And it was interesting when we did a focus group in advance of doing this survey. One of the comments from a deputy minister, and it led to a big conversation, was, when I started my career, I really thought I was going to make a dent in public trust and public confidence, and they weren't really sure if after so many years of service whether it's changed, the dial has changed. So again, there's that continuing concern. Now, on the other flip side of that is the notion that this is an area where technology and other approaches can actually help us to be more open and transparent, more consistent in the way that we deliver services. And by example, the whole movement towards open government, so greater transparency, opening the doors, engaging with citizens more readily and more actively. So again, opportunities there. We also asked about cooperation between various levels of government. That is a citizen's expectation. And there's sort of an underlying theme here I'm going to use for this one and the next one. And it's about reality doesn't necessarily line up with the vision. And what I mean by that is virtually everyone that we talked to in the survey had this vision of, yes, we need to collaborate. We need to work across borders at all levels of government, etc. And the reality is we're not doing a really good job at that, even though everyone has a shared commitment around that. And the same is true with performance management systems. So again, the sentiment that we heard back was almost every jurisdiction, maybe every jurisdiction, has a performance management framework in place, right? So dedicated, there's a vision. We need that kind of system to measure our progress, to respond back to results, and then be dynamic enough to respond and alter the way that we're doing business. And what we heard back was everyone's got those systems in place. The confidence level was about 30% of all the respondents. So vision versus reality. So it's about that implementation and moving that forward. And then finally, the area where probably a lot of you will be interested in and we'll be covering here is about fiscal limitations or the fiscal realities, austerity planning and measures that have been in place for a long time now. And again, this isn't a new story for anyone here, but it is growing evidence and concern amongst our senior executives in government that those fiscal realities are having a huge influence not only on our programming, the delivery of services, our ability to innovate and change, right? But it's also having a huge impact on morale and a number of other HR factors as well. So again, that was just a quick summary. So hopefully it set the stage. And as I say, we're going to get you more information. And I'm going to turn it over to Charles, who will introduce both himself and the panelists so that we can actually move into that part of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Is that on? Oh, there we go. Thank you, Robert. We have a large crowd this morning, so I apologize for those folks over here that can't see me. And hopefully you can see the rest of the panelists, because those are the ones that will be answering all the questions. Deloitte's very proud to be associated with IPAC, its leadership awards, and now more recently this survey. And I think there was a lot of interesting outcomes and insights that came out of this survey. And today we want to probe some of those with our distinguished guests. And so I'd like to very quickly introduce our panelists and then get right into the questions. We have just under an hour to just probe some of these key points. As I go through this process, I do encourage you, if you do have questions for the panelists, please stand in front of these two mics on this side, because I can't see that mic. And if I see you up there, I'll definitely give you an opportunity to ask your question to our panelist. So specifically, starting from my far left, Brent Mead, who's Deputy Minister of Seniors, Wellness and Social Development for the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador. Followed beside him, David Mohart, Deputy Minister of Alberta Human Services, and Laurie LeBlanc, Deputy Minister of the Interior Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, And right beside me, Andrew Trosh, Commissioner of Canada Revenue Agency. Now, I'm not going to go into a detailed bios because I think we'd rather just ask him some questions. So let's get right into that. I'm going to ask my first question to Lori and to Brent, and I'm going to go right into the question of fiscal limitations. So all public services in Canada, around the world, are dealing with the realities of fiscal limitations. And I guess if I ask you, Lori and Brent, how are you specifically, individually as deputy ministers, and working with your colleagues in each of your governments, dealing with this new reality that's definitely here to stay? And Lori, maybe you want to start?
Sure, thanks very much. So the interesting thing about the question, first of all, is the new reality. And I think we'd all agree. I've been in the public service for 28 years, and the vast majority of that time we've been going through different kinds of austerity programs or expenditure management programs. We call them different things. So it's not a new thing, but it is definitely, I think it's part of our reality now for sure. There's two things you can do. You can raise revenues or you cut your expenditures, and that's just fairly basic, the two fairly basic things we have to do. We have worked over the years at cutting expenditures, and I think most of us in the room would probably say that the cutting around the edges just simply isn't going to work anymore. We've done as much as we can from that perspective. So in Ontario, one thing that we're trying to do, a little bit different over the last couple of years, is we've changed our budgeting process. So we now have a program, review, renewal, and transformation. I always have trouble with that acronym, PRRT. And the idea is that now, as ministries, we're not going in and saying, here's program X, and give me more money because I need more money because there's a great amount of demand. And we don't have much information about what the outcomes are, but trust me, it's important. So we can't do that anymore. So what we do is we've been asked to go forward across ministries. So sometimes as a collection to say, for every program that we do, what is the relevance of that program to the government's priorities? What's the effectiveness in terms of meeting outcomes? What are the efficiencies in terms of the return on that investment? And is it sustainable in the fiscal environment? So we've had to look at every single program from that perspective. And we've had to go in front of our Treasury Board and say, here is the best evidence that we have. Here are the outcomes we're looking for. And here's how we're going to make a difference from a client-centered perspective. Right. So it's hard. It is really hard work. And so the one thing I would say is it involves all of us thinking differently. So we have to think in a way that's not just about how can I protect my budget or my program, but how can we look across ministries and say what's the best outcome for the client. And one of the examples we use in my ministry, in my world, is on housing and homelessness, where we've had to work much closer with the Ministry of Health and Community and Social Services and others and transform some of our programs. So I think that we do, as deputies, as senior leaders, need to look across the board, look to our colleagues in other ministries, look to the other orders of government and say, how can we do this differently, and look at that client-centered approach. What can be difficult, which is working out across horizontally. It's really hard for public servants to do that. We're not set up that way. But it allows for some really, really great opportunities and some ways to get some creative ideas in there, innovative ideas, new ways of delivering services. And by focusing on what really works and what doesn't, I think it allows those public servants who are creative and have good ideas to come to the forefront and bring them to the leadership, because we need those ideas.
So new realities, can't work in the margins, need to work cross departments, need innovative ideas. So Brent, is that what you're seeing in Newfoundland?
We are. I mean, we've built machinery around it with innovation accountability offices and processes similar to what Lori would have mentioned. And the other comment I would make is that austerity is not a new thing. You're right. You only had to look at the Alberta and Newfoundland and resource-rich provinces and the fluctuation we've seen in the last 10 years on that alone.
I think we've got.
Is there another person in the room?
I think we started the ghost walk.
Brent, back to you.
So I think the challenge is that, when you try to do continuous improvement, lean processes, any of those things, performance management systems, in times of austerity, they're even more challenging to introduce. And the political leadership and leadership that we need to bring as deputies gets really tested externally by those who would see alternative service delivery, for example, as downloading or privatization. You would see internally how many of us in this room have had a great idea in processes like Laurie would have mentioned, and we have those processes where we would bring forward a policy idea, but it requires upfront expenditure to deliver a better client service delivery process at the end and even save money. But because it requires an upfront investment, we always have that big struggle to get it through. So there is in Newfoundland and Labrador, I think, and I think this is reflected in other provinces, processes and machinery being built around it. I still think there's a requirement of maturing of the system around it. And it does require strong conviction at the political level and at our level to stay the course on it. And I think that that's really the test. And the only other comment I will make is that we don't overbuild those things as well. We can over-engineer these things. So it's a way of making it nimble and that allows the collaborative space to happen across departments. I mean, the reality of it is we're going to stay relevant. Relevancy beckons change, and so we're just going to have to continue to find ways to do it. So,
thank you. And really what both of you are saying is austerity is not a new reality,
no.
but it is time to start doing things differently. And I think that's really the important question that maybe will lead me into my next question. And this one I'll ask Andrew and David to respond to. We live in a reality where elected officials are often concerned about short-term priorities, but you, as deputy ministers, are charged with looking at the long-term agenda, such as the institutional health of our public service. Now, in the survey, 90% of the respondents indicated that building leadership capacity as very important or important. Now, I guess the question is, what are you seeing, what are you doing, what are your colleagues and yourself doing around building that leadership capacity at all levels of government and at all levels of the public service? So I don't know if, Andrew, you want to go first?
Thanks, I'll take a crack at that. So I've got 35 years in the public service, but I remember well at the start of my career, and this was with the Department of Finance, and a deputy was Kevin Lynch. And Kevin made it crystal clear the importance he attached to recruitment, to maintaining the central position of finance. So much so that he insisted on meeting the new recruits himself, and he insisted that that his ADMs, his direct reports, were part of the selection process. Now that was possible in part because of the size of finance, and that direct contact was possible. But I remembered that, and I think as leaders, we needed to ensure that we're putting a lot of time and attention into how we attract people to our organization, how we foster talent, how we motivate it, and our succession plans. I know everyone does that, but you know, for my organization, we're 40,000 people, and the average age of our agency is 47.5 years, and over the next 5 years, 7,000 of our employees will move out of the workforce. That's the baby boom generation moving into retirement. And among our executives, 57%, more than half, will take their retirement. So these numbers outside the agency are entirely unimportant to you. But as leaders, you should know those numbers because they're probably the most important numbers you need to know to be the leader of your organization at whatever level of government. And good leadership starts with good recruitment. And I'm not sure in the public service that we've spent as much time and attention. We certainly recruit for hard skills, but we should be equally attentive to the soft skills that we're looking for, especially when we're talking about changing the civil service culture. More worrisome is that easy as it may be to recruit, and we're still a very attractive employer, are we as attentive to providing the kind of workplace and career ladder for the people we recruit? Because the saddest thing would be to recruit the best and brightest only to lose them in the second or third year by a workplace that's not receptive. So we have a toolkit. The agency has 50 student ambassadors that we put on 30 college and universities campuses. We spend a lot of time on our youth network and making sure that that's very strong and a robust, a welcoming and supporting, nurturing place in the agency. And it's why we have a career booth here outside in the foyer. And when in the break, I'm sure young people, you want to go to our career booth. So, those are some of the tools. Also, a legacy of Kevin Lynch was naming deputies as university champions. I'm the champion for Memorial. And there you go. And at Memorial, we're actually we've been working with Memorial to place on the website a public service recruitment icon that'll give students there a pathfinder to careers in the public service. And again, this is a tool that I think you'll see others take up.
That's interesting. Your response around recruitment and retention as the foundation for building capacity and leadership, right? If you pay attention to the young folks and you help them grow and develop, they will be the leaders of tomorrow. A very simple thing to do, but probably very hard to actually execute. David, your thoughts on Alberta and your experience?
Sure, thank you. And I'll talk a little bit about my experience in British Columbia as well. To me, leadership is really about having that vision and demonstrating it through action. So it's actually about not just talking about things, but actually getting things done. So you need to model the way and really encourage that sort of action and development. I have the privilege of working in a large organization in Alberta that has mostly social workers, frontline income support workers, and others. I see leadership in them every day. They're dealing with persons that have individual challenges. They're dealing with challenges around regulations and legislation. What I try to do is empower them to think about what's best for the client, what's best for the individual, and they exercise some of their own leadership judgment in looking at that. Something that we're really working on within my department is to look at how do we make it much more of a client-centric focus by changing the way we do programs. We have this history of creating legislation and regulations that are so tightly wound up that we treat everybody exactly the same. When you're actually thinking about a client's need, it's not always the same. Every family, every individual, every person looking for a job has a different need. And what we need to do is create that restaurant, that menu of options that can actually help somebody succeed and think about what's best for their path forward. So my job as a leader really is to encourage those ideas, to embrace them, give people some opportunity to try things out, evaluate what works, and reflect on how we can actually assess outcomes in a different way. But it's also about giving people permission to try different things and to talk about the challenges that are out there. One of the beliefs that I have as a leader is we need to spend as much time outside of our office as we do within the office. And as much time as we spend in the legislature with ministers as we do with our own executive team and with our middle management. Something that I've been doing in each of my departments is meeting with that next layer of management to talk about what are the challenges that they see, what are their opportunities, what are their aspirations about how do they want to be grooming the new leaders in their organizations. I think as deputies and as any leader in an organization, one of our key jobs is to replace ourselves. Do ourselves out of work, and we need to spot that talent and give them opportunities to grow and flourish. We have to break the rules sometimes. There's lots of unwritten rules about how things have to happen and how hierarchies work. We have to break some of that down. I was inspired by some of the discussion this morning around embracing diversity. One of the things that I really try to do is know who your critics are, know who your champions are, and bring them together and actually have a robust discussion about what is it you're trying to actually work through and create that different environment. Something that I get feedback on from my team is that they admire the courage in bringing those people together, but they recognize right away it's a much richer discussion. And our job is really to create those marvelous opportunities to actually move the mark and move the agenda forward. So coming back to Andrew's point around recruitment, We spend a lot of time in recruitment because we're not very good at it broadly, and I'm sure the CRA is more proficient than everyone else, but it's one where we spend a lot of time, but I say to all of you as leaders, these are the most important decisions you're going to make. Spend the time that you need to recruit the right kinds of skills that you really need within your organization. Don't just fill the box that's been emptied. Don't just look for that skill set that you're bemoaning on the retirement of someone else. Think about how you move the agenda forward. In Alberta Human Services, we're embarking on a huge regional transformation. We're moving our decision-making out to regions. We're not filling the boxes the way they were before. We're actually recruiting for the future. And that's creating some uncertainty within the organization. But what we're doing is building an organization that's ready, not one that needs to transform. So focusing your time and efforts on recruitment is extremely important. In all my time in the public service, those folks that I've had the displeasure of having to dismiss, it's usually because of fit. It's usually because of lack of commitment towards development and moving things forward. It's not because of technical knowledge. So we need to think about how do we actually engage and embrace those leadership qualities that move the whole of the public service forward.
Laurie, Brent, Laurie?
I just wanted to add something to this because this is probably the thing that keeps me up at night, if that's the theme of this. And that's, it's really about the public service of tomorrow. And I agree with what's been said here as well. But the one thing I would say is we really need to focus on ourselves as leaders. So I think the leadership qualities have changed over the decades. We have to be really self-aware of our impact on other people. What kind of leader are we? Do people want to work for us? And I think the other piece of it is, we have to take some risks. So if we are doing recruitment or if we're looking at who our leadership team is, maybe they don't have 100% of the skill set or the core competency for a job, but they're good. And we know we can support them and give them that capacity so they can get there. And we've got to take some chances with people. We might make mistakes occasionally, but I'll bet you 99% of the time, we're going to make some good choices. So I think we have to take a risk. We have to hire people for and promote people for different things other than just the hard skill. What are those soft skills? What are the leadership? How can we motivate people? But I think it starts with ourselves. What kind of leaders are we? And are people going to want to work for us? And are they going to emulate our leadership style? And if they are not, if they look at us and say, God, I wish I didn't have to work for that person, then, I didn't mean to point at you. Then we have to do something about it.
Right.
I think this is a critical issue. I mean, there's one of the numbers that came up is that 55% agree, so this is leaders being surveyed, 55% agree that their staff focus on avoiding mistakes rather than innovating. Now, I think every leader in this room should put a big mirror in front of themselves and repeat that statement, because I think it is partly a leadership issue. Yes, it's a corporate culture issue, it's all of those things we talked about, but I think it is largely a leadership issue. And I think that, it's incumbent upon all of us, and I agree with Laurie, we need to be those, because I think tempered radicals are everywhere, right? I truly believe that our job is to help others do their jobs, including unleashing tempered radicals throughout the system that can begin to innovate and create within their teams. And so I often take an approach of very value-based strategic planning, which builds accountability at the team level and the individual level. I believe in admitting my own mistakes. Through storytelling, I will frequently stand in front of pools of staff and in divisions and whatever, and tell my own story about times of my own vulnerability and humility and the mistakes that I've made. And I think that what that says to people, the feedback I've gotten, is that, well, geez, if the deputy can stand up in a room and admit they've made mistakes and have found a way through it, right, then we should be able to make mistakes as well. And we would have support in doing that. And so I think there's lots of other things we can talk about around that, learning and development and whatnot. But I truly believe that it's through the organization that we got to try to build that culture. And we all have to look in that mirror and say, do we truly want to accept that we are allowing 55% of our staff to avoid making mistakes versus innovate? And what can I do as a leader to reverse that?
I was going to
David?
come back to Brent's comment about vulnerability. I think as leaders, if you don't make yourself vulnerable, you're never going to be effective. There always has to be a degree of uncertainty, and I think that creates some vibrancy to move forward, and certainly shows resilience as well. Something I was going to reflect on was the fear of making mistakes, and part of our job as leaders is not to create that panic. And I know we live in a universe now of policy by 120 characters, and we need to think about how we actually move away from the panic of the moment to thinking through things. And I can think of a fairly serious issue that was brought to my attention recently, and the staff assembled in the room and they had all of their facts gathered together, and we just talked through the issue. And the comments I got after was, number one, I didn't overreact. I listened, I asked, so what happened? What did we learn? What is it we're going to do next? What they saw was an approach that they felt empowered. They had laid out some next steps. They had really thought about what they needed to work on. And what I was gratified by was the fact that we could walk out with a very strong understanding of what this was without me driving it. They actually did it because of the way that I opened up a very safe environment to allow them to talk about something that they needed to reflect on. And I'm really encouraged that we have a plan to move forward.
Andrew.
I had a simpler point about leadership. I think we sometimes make a mistake in the public service. We distort our longstanding conventions to think that we should be anonymous. And that's a mistake. We cannot be, we should not be anonymous leaders to our employees.
No.
We certainly must be very respectful of the role of our political masters and not step into their space. But with our employees, we are their leader. And so we set the model, we establish the culture, we establish the risk tolerance for our organizations. And I think across the public service, too often we've been captured by our processes and by our executive teams, and not devoted the time to our frontline employees, to our clients, to our young employees. We need, your calendar is your test. Look at your calendar and it will reveal, and your employees will be very aware of your priorities, because they'll, whether they see you or they don't.
I love the way this conversation has gone since we started, because we started with the taboo word, which is fiscal limitation austerity. And you basically said, you know what, that's reality, let's move on. And then you talked about we need to have a creative workforce that's able to deal with the challenges and the new ways of doing things. And you've talked about ways of engaging people to allow them to go and make mistakes, but yet change the way you work, right, work cross departments. So I think this is great around the way that we need to think as public servants of how you create the future and you change and you do transformation. I do want to encourage people, if you have questions, please stand up at the mic. I can definitely use up the time with my questions, but at the same time, I want to make sure we cover what you guys have in mind. So the next question, we'll take a little different direction, and I'll ask it to Lori and Andrew. Delivering programs and services that are based on evidence-based policy is obviously a goal for the public service. Yet, at conferences like these, we often talk about how policy is often informed by things other than evidence, such as the political winds of the day. Now, if you think about how you engage today with different forms of evidence, so working with academics, working with other folks, using different techniques, what are you seeing out there around the evolution of public policy making and how we can use different techniques to make that happen? So maybe, Lori, you want to start?
Sure. So I already talked about our focus, and I think across the government, across the country, sorry, on looking at outcomes and evidence base for that outcomes, and what's our return on investment. So with the austerity comes the opportunity to really focus. So that I think that's a great thing. I'm not a believer that it's an either or. So either you're able to think long term with great evidence and have that policy information and the academic research, or you're doing short-term political wins. I think they come together quite nicely. So we use evidence as often as we can, but we don't wait necessarily for all of the evidence to get in before we take action, because we wouldn't respond as we need to. We wouldn't be nimble enough. I think part of our thinking, and I think it's part of our responsibility, to bring people together, think about what are the political needs and what's on their agenda, because we can have the best evidence-based policy decision in the universe. But if it's not politically palatable, if a politician can't stand up and communicate why they're doing that, it's not going to get anywhere. And frankly, I don't think it should. I think we need to do that. We have that obligation. You know, and I think bringing people together, and we do in Ontario, have had the experience of using some great research institutes. We have good relationships with some of our academic institutions, but you got to bring them, my view, you got to bring them together at the same table. So we just are wrapping up work, as an example. We have an expert advisory panel on homelessness. So government has made a commitment to eradicate homelessness in Ontario. So we brought together a panel, and what I thought was really neat about this and why I wanted to mention it is we have 14 experts. They're academics, they're service delivery agents, our municipalities, they're on-the-street providers, and it's chaired by 2 politicians, the chair of Treasury Board and the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So together, these 14 people from very different perspectives have been brought together not to say, how should we spend our money, or what's the new thing that we should do, but to say, how do we define homelessness? How do we have that common baseline? And then how do we determine if we're making a difference? So what are the metrics? How do we enumerate? How do we know if we're making any progress? So this is a group of people that were focused on that, which is hard to keep people away from kind of the shiny new, you know, bauble in the window. But they've done their report. It's not public yet. It's great work. It's brought together all of those different perspectives. And I think everybody compromised a little bit, but it's a practical way to move forward. And I think that's what we need to do, is create more of those forums. Bring the academics, the research people, with the practitioners, with the politicians, with the public servants together, and look at a problem and how to bring forward some solutions.
Andrew, you want to provide some comments?
It's very hard to create just-in-time evidence if you didn't spend some time and thought years earlier in creating the kind of information you would need to evaluate the undertaking. And I think that's more of the public service challenge. We'll leave it to our political masters to make the decision, and to what extent the decision is based on evidence or not is not for me. But certainly for me is to make sure that I've laid the groundwork, that the evidence is there and it's commensurate with the size of the public expenditure, and that it's rigorous, and that it's balanced, and that it's brought to bear on the decision. And it's surprising perhaps, but there's vast tracts of public expenditure where when you go in and you start asking the questions, you actually find that sometime earlier, no one had really put in place what was needed. So you come to do the audit, or you come to do the evaluation, we have these tools, and sometimes they're finding that the objectives were never clearly articulated and the groundwork had not been laid. So that's, I think, a failure of public service a little bit. One thing I find really exciting, and we're putting a lot of emphasis on this in the agency right now, is experimental design. So if you don't have the evidence, one thing you always have the capacity to do is to run an experiment. So, you know, in my language, we're looking at we're trying to get some particular change in behavior, typically around compliance, or maybe it's the uptake of e-services. So instead of just doing one approach, we'll run 4 approaches. If we're sending a letter, we'll send 5 variants of the letter, and we'll have a control as well. Or we'll alternate an audit versus a visit versus a letter versus a phone call, and we'll measure the outcome. So it's a way of, it's a low-cost approach. It's a fairly nimble approach, and you can learn as you go. It's incremental, but I would recommend experimental design. I would close by reminding us, it's one of the benefits of federalism, which we need to remind ourselves constantly. A federation is a natural laboratory. And IPAC is one of the ways where we're able to bring our test tubes together and actually compare our results. We don't do enough of that in this country. We don't take the advantage of the federation that we have to compare different approaches and results.
So new approaches to getting evidence, new thinking around that. I think we have a question on the floor. You guys have anything you want to add to the last topic? David or Brent?
Something I would add to Laurie's comment. I think one of the biggest successes in bringing groups together is where you can put the money discussion to the side and actually talk about the principles and the values that you're actually trying to work through. I find that the sooner you can do that, the more quickly you get to an informed discussion that can really beat through the many issues that are there. As soon as you get to money, it just gets too cast in stone, and it becomes an outright debate.
If I may, Charles, one thing that struck me this morning, and I know there's been great debate about this, but Mr. Nicholson's comment about losing our mind struck me very profoundly this morning. I don't think we've been losing our minds. I think we may have been distracted, and we may be using our policy shops in ways that to feed the centre and to feed some of these accountability processes that I think we've over-engineered, I think is a challenge that we've created in governments. But I today can sit here as a deputy and feel that the policy advice, the expertise, the competency is as strong today as it was 10 years ago in the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, and I would think that speaks for many governments. And I
but
think
it's
we
done
gotta
differently.
It's just done differently.
Correct.
And so I just wanted to make that, and I think the comment that that Andrew made, that forums like this and how we could actually build our forums like this to create the ability to share amongst FPT and municipal governments and Aboriginal governments and academia is critical. And we've got to create that way of sharing the best practice. I mean, in this time of, we share a lot of public policy dilemmas and issues. And we got to be able to reach into each other's toolbox from time to time to figure out how we're doing it. So.
That's great, thank you. We have a question from the floor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Maria David Evans, and I used to be a deputy minister, nicely retired now, thank you very much. I'm going to ask about a sensitive topic. One of the things that used to keep me up at nights, and maybe I was more unlucky than the rest of you, but my ministers used to keep me up at nights. And it was around some of the things that you talked about. So for example, risk-taking, mistakes, appointments in your own department that you have no control over, which you talked about, recruitment and retention and so on and so forth. And culture and the environment that they, of course, because they are the leader of your department in many ways, they are creating that sort of culture. And so I wanted to see if any of you had been kept up at nights by ministers and issues with ministers, and maybe talk a little bit about how you manage that key relationship, because that does impact what you do as the interface between the political and the rest of the public service.
That's a great question, thank you for that. Who would like to start with that one? I'm not answering it.
I will. What have I got to worry about? No, so the way, and Charles, you had this in the question, so it doesn't come as a surprise, because you have a question about innovation. And innovation, so this, and we're all confronted, we've all had the conversation with our employees where you say, where they're saying, you're asking us now to be innovative, but the public service is notoriously risk adverse, and if there's an error that causes a controversy for our organization, you'll be the first to be concerned about it. So the only way you can balance that apparent contradiction is risk management, which is fine, and it's about smart risk. So, because as much as I want the agency to be an innovative organization, looking open to ideas and suggestions and cutting edge. There are certain risks we don't want to run, certain mistakes we can't afford. And so we certainly need to take all of our employees through smart risk, calculated risk. What are the risks? What can go wrong? And what strategies do we have to mitigate it? If we've done that, I'm quite prepared to take on some risks. And I think my minister's prepared to take on some risk as well, if I'm persuasive, but not blindly, not stupidly, calculatedly.
Yeah.
And we'll pick our spots. And so I think risk management is the key.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach and just really talk about interpersonal relationships. And there's a difference between a public service and the political side, obviously. We need to make sure that we understand what that is, that our staff understand where that line, I hate that term line, but I'm going to use it, that line is, and that we respect the political job and the difficult job that they have, and that we try to help on the political side, our ministers understand sometimes the challenges that we have. And my experience has been that I have always tried, and I've encouraged my staff to try to walk a mile in their shoes. Watch question period. Watch when a minister gets just completely surrounded by cameras with really aggressive, Queen's Park reporters, and they don't have the answer because you haven't gotten it to them in time. That is something that is, I would not want to be in their shoes. People need to understand how stressful their job is. They also need to understand our obligations as public servants in terms of getting them the best advice that we can and all of those things. And it's really about building the trust. With ministers, I've always spent time with them. I don't keep secrets from my minister. I tell them when there's a problem. Hopefully I have some ideas about a solution, but if we don't trust each other, that relationship's never going to work. And I've had lots of different kinds of ministers, and I would say the common denominator is you have to work hard to get that trust, and that's FaceTime. And that's as soon as you lose the trust, and I've said this to folks in my ministries over the years too, is it's not about the magnitude of the thing that you kept from them or the thing that didn't happen. It's the fact that you kept something from them, and that erodes trust, and then you're dead in the water. So that's always been my approach in terms of trying to build that from the start, from the get-go.
David?
I don't want to parrot everything Lori said, but trust is the basic essence here. So the interpersonal relationship between you, even with your executive and other colleagues across government, is being very forthright and honest about the challenges that you see. I find that the most effective relationships that I have with ministers specifically is where we talk about some basic understandings and ground rules, if you will, on approaches. What is your personal life like? What's mine? How does that balance? Are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? Can I expect a call after midnight? Those are the kinds of things that sound very basic, but it's pretty fundamental to understanding how do we want to work together. And then you start working through some of the issues. And to Lori's point, building the trust comes with both being vulnerable, but also stepping out with some advice. And when a minister turns to you after they've just given a speech, and your natural inclination is, "Great job, minister, great job," give them some honest feedback. Did you get your point across? Were there things you could have done differently? So be very frank and honest. That's what they're looking for, just as we would if we were asking our team, how did that come across to the organization? So being very open and frank with them builds that trust, gives you some latitude to try different things. And what I find, I'm actually on my third minister in 12 months. And it's one where you learn to be nimble, but you learn how to demonstrate the value that the public service can bring. They have a particular role, and we need to appreciate the difficulty of their role, but at the same time they need to challenge and appreciate the challenges that we see every day. So to me, it's very much an interaction that needs to be based on trust.
Yeah. So for me, it's always been simple. Fearless advice, loyal implementation, and that's the heart of building a relationship of trust and respect with the minister. And you know, as a deputy of 9 years, I have stories to tell of where that's not worked out so well sometimes. But I'm still a deputy. And so as I look in the mirror every morning, I know my own values-based leadership is the one that carries me through on it. But I think, you know, Laurie has touched on an important point, and Maria, you asked a question, and you use the words culture. I think this is where ministers and deputy ministers, in having understanding of the respective roles, you had 3 ministers in a year. Ministers do not define the corporate culture of departments, in my experience. It is the leadership throughout the department. You will have ups and downs around ministers who will complement and support the work you're doing in building a certain culture in the organization. Sometimes you may push against certain things or characteristics of a minister that will challenge that. But as deputies, I firmly believe, and as leaders throughout the organization, it's our responsibility to build that culture and to have the understanding in that organization about the role of ministers, so they do respect and acknowledge the difficult position they're in. You know, I often get you'll often get different ministers. Some will be a little bit more aloof or standoffish. They won't get into the they won't get into details. They'll allow deputies to run departments. Others will get right into it. They become very operational, hands-on. And it's also the ability for us to shift with those different styles as well, and to figure out ways of managing that. And so it was a very good question, Maria, and we didn't think we were going to get through this panel without it being asked. So, thank you.
Laurie made a key point that if there's a real issue, if there's a problem, you're likely to earn that trust if you're very candid with your minister, and you've done that in advance of the news article.
Yes.
And the second point, I think, which I think is inherent in the remarks, but it's important to underscore, is are you also helping problem solve?
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
Are you giving them a menu of solutions, and are you doing it in the kind of real time in the 24/7 environment in which they live?
And I know we have another question, but I just want to go back to what you started with, though, as well, which is obviously the trust between the senior public servant and the elected official is absolutely key. But once you've done that, and once you do have the trust, then you can apply what you talked about, which is managing risk. So you have the ability to actually engage in a conversation and say, Mr. Minister, Mrs. Minister, will you let us try this? Because the outcome could be very positive, and we've managed the risk around it. But you have to start with a relationship, and then go to innovation by trying different things. So let's go to another question on the floor.
Hi, thank you very much for this discussion so far. My name is Julia Sable. I work for the provincial government here in Nova Scotia. I just wanted to take you back a bit earlier in your conversation when you were talking about being willing to share mistakes and show your vulnerability. So I want to ask that question that you may know is coming already. Can you share some stories with us of times you've made mistakes to sort of model that vulnerability for us?
So Brent, I think you volunteered to do that one, right?
I do usually do it in small groups, not on live streaming events. Because sometimes, I mean, the mistakes for me, obviously I need to generalize some of them, but the mistakes for me have sometimes been around loyal implementation, and the fact that we work in the political world, we work in the political sphere. So in that world, we have our responsibility to give fearless advice, and we have, in many respects, our checklist of how we do that. But there's also a political process. There's also political checklists that if you're getting direction from a minister, that you would assume that that minister is also adhering to their own protocols and processes within the political system. And sometimes as a deputy, you do have to step into the political sphere to ensure that that fact has been done. Because when it all goes south, it's everybody that ends up being caught up in it. And that for me has been an experience of how, and I continue on a day-to-day basis. We just had this conversation with the line. Mm-hmm. But the reality is sometimes we look across that line and we can see where their own vulnerability or risk is, And we may need to step into that in the name of fearless advice, to give political advice. And for me, that is the constant struggle that I have as a deputy, of how I interface in that way, and when is the line truly there, and when is it that I can walk away from the conversation and say that I've been fearless, that I didn't make assumptions, that I'm, that I fully understood the context of it. And that for me has been some of the mistakes that I've made, and some of the coulda, woulda, shoulda thinking that I have as I reflect back on it. And my only other thing is, we all carry regret from time to time around relationships with staff or interpersonal relationships we may have. And I truly do believe that we need to continue to seek forgiveness and to forgive when time comes in this world. Because as deputies, as leaders, we need to emulate that, and we need to lead it by example. And I think that that is something else that I've learned, that there's times when you need to bury those hatchets and to seek forgiveness or to give it. So
Brent, you're a great sport. Thank you for doing that. Would you like to share something?
I want to take a bit. I have lots of mistakes that I can share, but I'll do it one-on-one with
That's
people
right.
if they're interested afterwards. But one of the things that I would say is, I probably was in the public service for about 25 years in a variety of different positions. I became the appointed deputy of Aboriginal Affairs. And, I learned so much in that time period when I was really focused on issues with our Aboriginal communities and peoples. And I realized that for 25 years, and for a number of years in senior positions, that I had been making an error in judgment in terms of the way we should, in my view, operate our programs, the way we need to look at Aboriginal issues, some of the overwhelming challenges facing those communities, and not understanding that well enough. And I would have done things a lot differently. I was the ADM responsible for employment and training programs. I would have designed them differently. If I had the time in Aboriginal Affairs before,
Right.
I was in community safety and corrections, I would have had a different perspective about Aboriginal justice. So it's a mistake in terms of a mistake of ignorance, and I think that's just one thing that I would say, I wish I had done it 25 years before. It's changed my approach to things, and I think we're probably, in many areas across the public servants guilty of not understanding Aboriginal issues, and there are probably others as well. That was the one that really struck me.
Thank you.
I'm quite happy to talk at some length about Brent's mistake.
You can actually read an Auditor General's report.
But as for me, I took the question though about a style of leadership about us, and so I like to think I explicitly admit to mistakes in two different ways. One is sometimes when it's a collective agency mistake, sometimes it's important to take personal ownership of it, if for no other reason than it would stop any blaming, very unproductive blaming. And so it's a way of cutting that off by simply taking it and clearing the air and let's move on. The second thing, where it is actually more a personal accountability, a decision was called by me, and with the passage of time, you got it wrong. The worst thing to do, beyond never making any decisions,
Right.
the worst thing you can do is not acknowledge it and course correct.
Right.
And sadly, some of this, getting caught up in our ego or not being open to the actual, as you say, the evidence, can carry on a course too long and dig yourself in. And it's not that bad in a lot of the management areas that we're talking about, that with the passage of a year, and it didn't work, and it was a mistake, and so let's correct it.
Very good. Thank you. I think we have one more question here. That'll probably be the last one on the table, but go ahead.
Hello, I'm also another Maria, but Maria Bellin, a federal policy analyst. So this panel was talking about your anxieties and concerns and what's keeping you up at night. I was wondering what gets you excited to get up in the morning, go to work.
That's an easier
Could
question.
you talk about some of the promising talent in your organizations? What are the qualities that you think, wow, the challenges that were listed by Deloitte, I feel assured that when I retire in 5-10 years, that the future of the public service is in safe hands. So if you could talk about your rising talent.
You want to start?
Sure. I mean, I truly believe, I mentioned this earlier, I truly believe the tempered radicals are going to take over the public service. And I believe that there is, if we create the right leadership and the right environment, that new professionals, new public servants, those coming in, and not necessarily the age demographic, but those coming in from the private sector or other orders of government, they are demanding a new way of doing business. And collectively, we will find that way of doing business. And that's actually what allows me to sleep at night. I mean, I'm glad you ended on this note, Maria, because it was about what keeps us awake, but what allows me to go to bed every night and sleep well and hit my 2 feet in the morning and say, I love my job, and I have every day of my career, by the way. I've had days where I've hit my feet on the floor and say, oh geez, I gotta go and deal with that today. But I've hit my feet on the floor every single day of my life and said, I love my job. And for me, what does come for me now and allow me to sleep is that I know that while we have all of these challenges and issues, and some of the data and some of the survey results are sometimes a bit troubling, that we do have a core public service, a young public service that is demanding more and better. And I think the revolution or the evolution will occur in that way. I truly do believe it. And I see it in different organizations occurring. I see elements of that happening in the public service. And so, so it's people like you, Maria, that's allowing us to sleep at night.
David.
Just building on that comment, what I get most excited about is the caliber of folks that I get to work with, not just within my own department or within the government of Alberta, but our partners at the municipal level, our partners federally, locally, but also across the country. And we have a lot of talent out there, a lot of ideas about moving things forward, and I'm a catalyst for ideas. I like to grab those ideas and talk about the possible. And what I really get excited about is, that next discussion that I'm going to have with a team about some challenging issue, but they're coming with ideas on how we can move it forward. So that's what I get most excited about.
Laurie?
Yeah, I mean, obviously building on what's already said, the one thing I'd add is, public service isn't necessarily the best paying gig in town these days. The people who are in public service are there because they are really committed to public service. And I have to say, every day I am surrounded by people who are in it, despite what the public might think sometimes, not because of the pension and not because of the money, because they want to make a difference. And every day I get inspired by people who come to me, come to our discussions with a problem that we're trying to solve and a commitment to making things better for the people of the province. And I know I sound like I'm standing on a pulpit and preaching. I really, truly believe that 28 years and the commitment to making the world a better place in whatever way that is absolutely inspiring. And I see it in the new young professionals who come in. I see it in the people who are mentoring them. And I have complete faith that the public service will be in great hands in the future.
Right.
I personally get a lot of charge from the energy, the enthusiasm, the optimism, the idealism of young people. That's why I put some time into it. It's not just for good business reasons, but I think it keeps me motivated as well. What's important and what began to come out, I think, in your answer as well, is in the public service, we need to make sure that we're really focusing on our citizens, on the population that we're serving, and the wicked problems that we have. And we really need an outward orientation, and never to forget that. So I would say one of the things that really excites me is the possibilities in service that we have now, and the adoption of technologies and whole of government approaches and joined up approaches to provide much better service, and I find it really exciting future that way. So
Excellent.
there was a fairly pessimistic tone, I thought, by the keynote speakers from this morning, and some of it is certainly warranted and worrisome, but there's lots of opportunities in the era we are now.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with you. And maybe to wrap up, because we have about 3 minutes left, I'll give you each like 30 seconds with a closing comment of something that you would have liked to say or something you want to reinforce as a closing message. And to me, if I was to recap, although we started with fiscal limitation and we talked about challenges, you're clearly giving a lot of opportunities for the future, I think is what we've talked about here at all levels of government. And so maybe just as a quick closing remarks, maybe start at Brent, work our way down.
So you're all leaders in some form or fashion within your organization. Continue to emulate and build on those leadership skills, and build accountability for those who you report to and those who report to you. Build accountability amongst you as teams and as individuals around holding true to those values. And that's what I think is what's going to truly change the public service.
David?
So one of the things that I focused on with folks is, demonstrate your intention by action. And one of the quotes, it's a bit corny, that I use with my team regularly is from Yoda talking to Luke Skywalker. And he actually says, there is no try, just do it. And it's really about how we demonstrate our action and make it reality.
Laurie?
So I sleep pretty well at night, despite the fact that somebody chose me to be on this panel. It must have been based on my picture of dark circles under my eyes. But and the reason I do is, I just think we have great talent. I have great enthusiasm. We've got great opportunity, and some of that is because of the austerity measures. So I think we have some really interesting times ahead and challenging times, and I think we're going to see a turn in the way we focus on clients. But what really inspires me is that I think we've turned into a public service where we're much more interested in partnerships. Whether it's out of necessity or because that's the way society has evolved, partnerships across ministries, across governments, with the local governments, with the federal government, with nonprofits, with civil society. And we have a long way to go. We have lots of opportunity there, but I know that you get better minds, you get all the smart minds in the room together, and you're going to come up with a great solution. So I'm really comforted by that.
That's great. Andrew?
Well, I sleep well at night, but there's a strong drink of scotch usually that probably contributes a bit to that. So why don't we look at the words on Halifax IPAC conference: initiate, integrate, innovate. Those are 3 pretty good watchwords for you all. Don't let the doomsayers, and it's the best of times and it's the worst of times, as it always is. And maybe the one I'll underscore just is that integrate. That's a big word. We talked about moving across levels of government, but my retort to that sense that we have no mind and or we're being hollowed out is, I actually just think it's now the sweet spot isn't to have a segment called policy and another called programs and a third called IT. To me now, the sweet spot is those things merging together, new kinds of skills and new ways of working. I just think it's a different world than it was 50 years ago or 25 years ago. So,
thank you.
And that's where young people are.
And my final comment will be to take you back to the survey. And please use this survey. IPAC does this every 2 years. Use it to start conversations like the one we just had. Use this to engage people in thinking about what we could be working on. What could we do differently? If you don't like the results of these, make sure that next time they're different, right? Because these are the questions we need to focus on. These are the things we need to work on. So to our panelists, Brent, David, Laurie, Andrew, thank you very much. And thanks for all of you for listening.